Bem-vindos todos a mais um encontro do Traços. Hoje, vocês todos me ouvem, certo? Sim? Mais alguém sim com a cabecinha aí para eu ver se vocês estão me ouvindo.
Yes.
Então, hoje a gente tem um Traços diferente, nós temos duas convidadas, uma convidada muito especial, que é a nossa amiga, Patrícia Maria Martins. A Paty ela trouxe para a gente essa convidada dela, que é a Traci, e ela vai apresentar a Traci para a gente e vai conduzir aí o evento. Então, estou apresentando a Paty é psicóloga clínica, mestre pela PUC São Paulo, Chapter Leader São Paulo, Sidewalk Talk, Conversas na Calçada. Paty, sinta-se em casa, você é super bem-vindo, um prazer ter você aqui.
Obrigada, Lu. Queria dar bom dia para todos. Acho que a maioria me conhece. Primeiro, eu gostaria de agradecer imensamente o convite do Marcos Quintais e da Luciana Ximenes por eu estar aqui hoje. E para mim, essa manhã tem gosto de festa. Festa por poder partilhar o encontro de 3 comunidades que faço parte, que me são tão caras na minha vida. A minha comunidade de amigos, a comunidade junguiana, Tiaços e Lapa, da qual eu faço parte, e a comunidade do Sidewalk Talk, com alguns voluntários que estão aqui hoje também. E ontem a gente teve o privilégio de ouvir o Luiz de Turinese falar sobre a comunidade marginal. E hoje, no Tiaços, vamos ter a oportunidade de ouvir a Traci nos contar sobre as reflexões e a experiência que ela tem vivido desde os tempos que ela fundou o Sidewalk Talk em 2014, quando ela decidiu sair às ruas de São Francisco para escutar as pessoas nas calçadas, criando e multiplicando espaços de escuta. O fazer alma nas calçadas, a construção de comunidade, do latim comunitas, comunidade e companheirismo. A arte da escuta na polis como ferramenta de comunicação, diálogo e ação política. Ela vai compartilhar com a gente a experiência para além dos muros dos consultórios, que é algo que a gente vem tanto discutindo, né, nesses últimos encontros dos Tiaços. Ela é americana e atualmente mora em Heidelberg, na Alemanha. Traci Ruble é psicoterapeuta de adultos e casais, mestre em psicologia somática pela California Institute of Human Science, graduada em ciência política pela Universidade de Santa Bárbara, ativista social e fundadora do Sidewalk Talk, Conversas na Calçada. Antes dela começar, a gente ia pedir, ela deu a sugestão para que vocês possam, à medida que ela for falando, vocês possam colocar no chat em inglês ou português, que ela vai acompanhar, as associações livres, imagens, no encontro mais interativo, em que ela possa saber um pouquinho do que vocês estão pensando, sentindo, como se fosse um encontro nas calçadas, em tempos que a gente tem, né, a comunicação aí pelo chat. Então ela pediu para a gente ter essa possibilidade de interação via chat, então vocês fiquem à vontade, não necessariamente para já fazer perguntas, mas para ir associando durante a fala dela, tá bom? Traci, é um prazer enorme te receber aqui, gosto de sonho, tá bom? Seja bem-vinda, fala é tua.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to say that I am not a Jungian analyst. However, my first analyst for 7 years was a Jungian analyst, so I have been analyzed. But I'm excited to learn from you. So that's part of the reason I really am excited to have you contribute in the chat, not just your free associations, but theorists, quotes, people that are coming to mind. I'd like this to be a co-creative space. So be brave and just use that chat and let yourself drift in and out of dreamlike state as I'm talking, and let us be in a co-creation if that's okay with you. I'm going to share the screen. I don't have slides that have a lot of text on them, so maybe the slides are mostly for me, but if at some point the community prefers that I turn the slides off, I'm okay with you telling me that. Let me just begin. And I kept some notes. I don't script talks. I'm too spontaneous for that, but I did keep some notes so that I don't over talk. So here's the journey we're going to go on here a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the intention, which I think I kind of shared. For me, my largest core value is learning. Learning and play are my two biggest values. I'm very playful. So there may be some irreverence. I might curse. That's kind of, you know, if that's a problem, let me know. I'm going to tell you about becoming a therapist and going from corporate life to therapy more from a psychological perspective so that you can understand the elements and the archetypal pieces of my own that led me to the sidewalk. And I'll have a particularly good time sharing with you the dream that arose that led me to the sidewalk. And we're going to analyze my therapist chair a little bit together. And then I'm going to spend the most time of our session together today talking about actual stories from the sidewalk. I'll talk about a few of my cases and how sidewalk talk has changed and is changing the way that I constellate my casework. So I've been practicing for 16 years now. I started out my training primarily in Gestalt therapy, and I'm getting ready to do a 3-month state of depth work with a Jungian analyst to do deep shadow work with a group of 10 women for twice weekly for 12 weeks. I'm excited about that. I'll mention a few thinkers that have influenced me, but they're certainly not all the thinkers, and what's come up, where I am now in the project and where I hope it goes. So I hope that that works for everyone. So that's where I'm going to pull out my notes. So I'm going to be on this slide for a little bit. I actually think it's more fun to look at your faces than my big lioness hair there. So I'm going to turn that off for a sec. I started, when I graduated from college, when I went to college at UC Santa Barbara, I actually paid my way through college. I didn't have a wealthy family. I was the first college graduate, and I didn't have time to finish all the reading. So what I learned was that I learn well in community. And so that's part of why I want you to free associate in the chat, that today I really created a mashup of all my favorite thinkers to share with you what were all the influences that led me from corporate life to therapy to the sidewalk. I said that I had trained in Gestalt therapy, but I'll tell you a funny story. When I first entered graduate school, my faculty advisor was a Freudian analyst and researcher. And I asked him, hey, what is psychodynamics? And, uh-oh. I'm going to just put that person on mute. There we go. What is psychodynamics? And he said, oh, it's the study of Freud. And I said, oh, I think Freud is shit. He said, huh, that's interesting. I'm one of the world's leading researchers on Freud. And I said, gosh, I feel like a real asshole now. He goes, well, I think it's funny how many anal retentive associations you've just made in the first 2 minutes of meeting you. Which I'm like, oh, great. And then when I actually took his class, I couldn't live that one down. I primarily trained in Gestalt, sensory motor psychotherapy, Hakomi, trauma therapy. I'm certified in EMDR. Along the way, though, the unconscious kept sneaking out. And I'm like, what's going on here? And so I did enter a psychoanalytic consult group with a Freudian. Was in that group for 2 years, and it really radically changed kind of how I saw things. Although Freud isn't my guy, I think Jung is more my guy. Most of my work is couples work. I think I still like to work in the concrete. I'm getting certified right now in internal family systems. But what was interesting is in this entire journey during those 5 years of training, I was in a women's painting group. And I was painting the whole time. And my father's a painter, and he came up and he looked at this 5 years worth of paintings. He said, oh, you split every one of your paintings in half into 2 paintings. And I have continued to be mesmerized by the paradox that I was painting and what I was trying to unearth in that process. So now I'm going to move on. This would be where I change slide, but it's just a placeholder. I want to say a little bit about the dream that I had that led to sidewalk talk. So at the time, there was a context that all this was happening. We had just had a big school shooting in the United States where a young boy had entered an elementary school and shot close to 60 5- and 6-year-old kids. And then we also had a bomb that went off at the Boston City Marathon. Previous to the year, we had someone show up in a movie theater and shoot a bunch of people in the movie theater. And I was already beginning to wonder, okay, psychotherapy is not actually solving this problem. Oh, I should mention too, during my journey in my studies of psychotherapy, I was completely mesmerized and pissed off by James Hillman's book, There's Been 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse. And so here I was paying all this money to study psychotherapy. And then James Hillman is telling me, you're probably not going to make much of an impact. I'm like, great. I'm spending close to $150,000 US to study this field, and maybe I'm going to make things worse. So at this time, I realized as I was talking to friends, and at the time I was running a psychotherapy magazine. I'm now 2 years into my licensure, so I've been practicing for about 7 years. A lot of my therapist colleagues were writing think pieces, analyzing what was going on in the culture. And for some reason that felt elitist to me. I'm like, I don't want to analyze what's going on in the culture. Do we really know? Because you're analyzing the culture from your lens. That's still your lens. How are you going to really find out? And then I had a dream. And the dream was this. I had a dream that I have a big leather chair in my therapy office. It's more like a throne. It's so large that I can actually curl up in it. You could probably fit 3 people in my chair. It has big, huge armrests, large enough that I could put a cup of tea on the actual armrest. And the chair is interesting because I can literally sit cross-legged with no shoes on in the chair, and I often did. So I was a bit of a juxtaposition because I'd be very informal in my posture, but this chair was like a throne. And I had a dream, how could I get that chair in the elevator of my building, because I was on the 11th floor, into the elevator by myself, have it go all the way down to the street, push it out the front door, onto the street, and sit there. And then I thought, but that chair is so big. It's like a throne. What kind of chair would I give the other person to sit in? Do I have to get another chair the same size? So this dream wouldn't let me go. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then finally I decided, I talked to a few colleagues, let's go sit on the sidewalk. Now, marketing and branding and capitalism loves to twist this stuff around and make it about loneliness or helping people or street therapy. For me, it was never that. It was always an experiment, and it was always a response to this dream. So I wish I could tell you that I had some grand master plan. I did not, but this dream wouldn't let me go. And I knew that I learn in community, and I learn from storytelling, and I learn from listening to people. So 28 colleagues of mine got together in a room and planned what were the safety implications of listening on the sidewalk, and how could we set this up in a way that felt safe for everyone. And it was a really cool experience. I'm going to show you a video really quick. Share. I'm going to stop presenting. Oh, there's the chair. It's a similar chair, but I'm going to show you this video. Bear with me here. I'm going to leave the sound off, so don't be annoyed that there's no sound. The music on this video is really, I don't love it. It's really, but I want you to see what happens. Hopefully the resolution will get better. It's only 1 minute. I'm a little sad the resolution isn't so great. He's 15 years old. She's actually Brazilian, this girl. Okay, so I'll come back. Maybe just notice what's happening in your body and type anything that comes up for you in the chat. Give yourself a moment to just wonder about that. So what was really interesting about that very, very first time that I listened on the sidewalk was this dethroning, in essence, that happened for me. Because what actually was happening is, unlike when you're a therapist where you have a captive audience because the person is coming to you supposedly to reduce a symptom or for help. In this instance, I'm the vulnerable one sitting there offering myself openly to be rejected over and over and over again. And I am rejected over and over and over again. People don't always think it's charming. People don't always smile. I've had people flip me off. I've been spit on before. I've been attacked thinking that I was a politician trying to promote certain political ideals. So suddenly I'm not in this safe leather chair anymore. And it became this opportunity to really play with, wow, how am I using power as a therapist to hide behind a whole bunch more complexity that's happening on the street? We began listening more and more, and I'll share a few more stories just really in rapid succession. I am going to share again because I want to show you the pictures. So I'll leave this next one for a little bit because I think the pictures are also so fun to look at. If I can get the screen to shrink. There we go. Okay. So one of the early experiences I had on the sidewalk, I'm white. I live in a multicultural city, and I had a therapist colleague come out and sit in my chair, and she screamed at me about racial privilege and that I was being a white savior sitting out on the sidewalks. And what she needed to really be heard around white supremacy and white saviorism in the field of psychotherapy. I had another listening experience where we went out and listened in the Castro, which is a gay neighborhood in San Francisco. It was 2 days after the nightclub shooting in Miami or Orlando, the Pulse nightclub. We had 12 volunteers show up on 48 hours notice. Every chair was full the entire time we were there. My sons came with me, who at the time were 6 and 8, and they said to me, my youngest at 6 said, "I think you need to stop doing sidewalk talk." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because you make people incredibly unhappy. Everybody that sat in your chair today started crying." And I said to him, "Do you think that made them unhappy, or do you think that they needed their tears to be heard?" Then we did a bus tour across the South. We had 8 of us. We raised some money. We flew into Chicago, Illinois, and we drove from Chicago through Indiana, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky. I'm trying to think of all the southern states, listening to Trump voters. We were actually sponsored by the Islamic Society and the Human Rights Institute. And on 2 of our stops, we didn't have a lot of money, so we were sleeping in attics. We were being fed by churches, and the imam at the local mosque in Birmingham, Alabama, invited us in for traditional prayers and fed us after listening in Birmingham, Alabama, which both Louisville, Kentucky and Birmingham, Alabama have been hot spots in some of the racial injustice and police brutality in the United States. And so to really be a part of a community that is holding space in a broader way was a real privilege. They also invited us to bring in cameras and shoot our entire experience with them. I had another experience with a woman, and unlike in the therapy office where we're mindful of self-disclosure, we were sitting outside of an event, and it was a neurodiversity event. So there were a lot of different folks whose brains worked very differently than my own. And this woman said to me, "I feel really lonely. I feel really isolated. Do you ever feel that way?" And I said to her, "I do." And she said, "I want to hear more." And so I told her about my own experience with loneliness. And she said to me, "More than any therapy or anything I've ever experienced, your willingness to say, 'Me too, I feel lonely too,' was the most moving experience of sitting with you today." Another day on the sidewalk in San Francisco, this young guy, he looked like a tech bro, as we call them in San Francisco. You kind of like get annoyed with them, and it's like they're oozing white male privilege out their pores, and you kind of roll your eyes a little bit. Walks by, and he's got a hat on leaning side, kind of tipped sideways, and I'm making all kinds of judgments about him. He's got a swagger, he's got a crooked smile, and all I could think was, yeah, he's not going to sit down. But he did. He sat down, and I was actually on the ground that day. We didn't have enough chairs, and he sat on the ground with me. And he smiled, and he was a bit, playful, and he was compensating a bit for how much pain he was holding. And then he just stopped, and he said, "I'm 26, and I started my first job, and I've been doing it for 4 years at a financial institution. I go to work in the morning, and I sit in a cube, and not one person says hello to me when I arrive or says goodbye to me when I leave. And all I can think is, this what my life is going to be like?" And then he cried and said nothing for about 5 to 10 minutes. And we just eye gazed while he cried. This was not what I thought was going to happen with this young man. And then I reached across, something that I don't do as a therapist, and I just wiped one of his tears, and then just sat and let him continue to cry. And it was the most intimate, human, soulful moment. And then he said, "I feel so much better. I'm going drinking with my buddies. I'll see you later." And he left, and I never saw him again. Another woman came and sat down in my chair. She was an Asian woman. I'm not sure what part of Asia. She was in her middle to late 50s, and she had crumpled up hair and food all over her clothes. And I thought, oh, she must be one of the bottle collectors that collects the bottles out of the trash cans in San Francisco based on her appearance. She sits down and she proceeds to tell me that she is a ranked chess player, and that in fact her daughter is a famous scientist, and that she spends a large sum of her retirement funds going to very expensive spas all over the United States. And then she proceeded to say that she really liked sidewalk talk, and shared an experience that she had that day on the bus, sitting next to a little girl who was trying to learn to read. And she sat and helped the little girl learn to read. She is one of the many stories where my own bias is shifted. Then I had another young woman sit down. She didn't speak any English. I'm not even sure where she was from. She tried to say a few things, that she was sad, that she felt alone. She felt uncomfortable, but she decided to stay. And it was another one of those listening in silence moments where we just sat. And the energy that I'm always carrying when I do this is that I'm your equal, that the pain that lives in you lives in me. And that's the biggest change that's happened for me, is that I no longer feel any sort of separation, that somehow I'm helping this person in any particular way, but that I actually, and I think this is why people go deep with me, that I actually feel a deep sense of equality, deep sense of respect, a deep sense of honoring for how they are a reflection of me and I'm a reflection of them in so many ways. This picture in the top right corner, I just found. I've not shared it publicly because I don't own the copyright on this photo. But it was one of my most profound listening experiences I've had in my life. Wasn't planning on sharing it, but if it's okay, I'd like to share it with this community. I was up in Portland, Oregon. It was Mental Health Awareness Month, and we were actually sitting outside the Capitol, where actually all the mothers have been doing Black Lives Matter protests for the last year after George Floyd's murder. And this man comes walking by, and he sits on a bench right near our chairs. And I'm like, in this ginormous gigantic park, of all the benches he could have sat on, he decided to sit on the bench that was really, you could see the chair of the woman in the red hair there, really close to us. And I'd seen him walk by, and he's wearing a tie and slacks, and he's pulling a laptop computer on a roller. So I imagined that he was a lawyer that worked in the building. So again, another bias or assumption. He sits, and I walk by him because I'm getting ready to head back on a plane. And I said to him, "How's your day going?" He said, "It could be better." And so I slid in right next to him and I said, "Do you want to talk about it?" And then he proceeds to tell me that he was at the courthouse that day because he was on parole. And he told me the story about what he had been arrested for. He shared with me his experience of being Black in America. And I listened to him with a different lens, without the white savior lens or a helper lens. Actually, this man and I had a similar kind of way of talking and a similar sense of humor. You know how it is. You meet some people. I feel this way with Patrizia. You meet some people and you just go, "Oh, they're my people. I don't know why this person is my person, but I'm like, we have a thing. We have a thing. Ease with us." And I didn't do the reflective repeat back everything he said. I just was so moved. And I said, it's about the bad stuff, but about what he wanted to create. And in this whole dialogue, I'm keeping in mind power and privilege. And I wanted him to know that I was feeling an equality between the two of us. I said, "Hey, David, I gotta go." He goes, "Yeah, it was nice meeting you." Oh, I said his name. "Nice meeting you, Traci." And I said, I have an ask of you. And he says, "What's that?" I said, "If you ever see me sitting on a park bench looking like I need to be listened to or a hug, would you be willing to sit down and do the same for me?" He said, "Absolutely." And I've never seen him again. The last story I'll tell is the story of being a leader. By far, this stuff that happens on the sidewalk is the easiest part of the job. The worst part of sidewalk talk is leading the thing. Because look, you know, I'm totally fine getting people's shadow projections and negative projections as a therapist. I don't effing want it by people that I lead, but it just what happens. I'm sitting here talking to you guys. I might be on a TV show or on a podcast and people have this whole story about who I am. And I'm like, oh my God, I am just a neurotic freak like everybody else. I'm not these things that you think that I am. And that part has been really, really hard, and it draws a lot of shadow. I've had a lot of interesting acting out. And sometimes I'm willing to hold the shadow for people and act out myself all over the place, not to mention my own shadow stuff. Yeah, I've gotten myself into some pickles because I'm a bit rebellious. So then when people are being kind of aggressive with me, I'll lovingly step right into the enactment and tussle with them. So I'm learning not to do that, which is really, really good. All right. So I'll say a little bit about my cases. I'm going to go back because then you guys are going to look at those books and we're not going to go there just yet. So the number one question people ask, they ask me, well, how has this changed your clinical work? You know, it's really humanized me more. I think that, and I've supervised interns now, and the thing I notice from interns is they feel so compelled to prove their efficacy as the therapist. Like, I have to see the client change in some way, or the client must be more steady, or they must improve, or I must do some intervention that creates some big abreaction, some big catharsis, so that I, as the therapist, can feel good about the job that I'm doing, right? And I'm like, ooh, yeah, ooh. Sidewalk talk has cured me of that, right? I feel really, really like I'm bringing my full humanity into that room in a different way. And I guess I do have, I have and again, I know you guys are analysts, so you're working with material in a different way, but if I can't love you, I don't work with you. I should say, if I can't love and hate you, I won't work with you. Because I feel like the capacity to be in the struggle together and not need stuff to happen is where the magic happens, right? This is where, you know, when we're holding paradox and finding the meaning in that paradox and not needing somebody, like the minute you feel like you need to fix something means that you already thought something was broken in the first place, right? And I don't look at people that way. You know, I frequently will have a client come in and I do trust myself a little bit more. I'll have some kind of free association or some kind of image that comes in, or something happens in my body, and I can use the countertransference in a much different way because of sidewalk talk, where I'm not using the information to back up from the client and chin scratch and analyze, but to lean in and use it as information about the relational field, right? And go, huh, right? How is what I'm feeling what they're not able to feel, which you guys all know, but how can I express it in a way that I'm putting it in the soup so that they're maybe willing to take a bite of that soup, or it makes the soup a little more delicious, you know? I had a guy, well, I don't want to get the specifics, but I'll say I've had people with intractable depression, and I threw everything at this guy and tried to, like, I mean, it was suicidal, really scary kinds of depression. And at the end of the day, what this guy needed was, he needed poetry, he needed music, and he needed friends. And sometimes we overcomplicate things sometimes. And I keep thinking about that. And I think about him a lot when I'm working on sidewalk talk, because I'm like, if our society was structured differently, would he have been depressed in the first place? And I'm convinced the answer to that is no. That his depression was not inside of him. His depression was a societal issue. You see the picture of this gal down here hugging one of her, or touching one of her listeners. We used to live in communities that did that. We would take our time, we would touch. Our humanity was the first thing that mattered. If he lived in that world, he wouldn't have been in my office, for sure. I also have clients that will come in and loneliness is their fundamental issue. Their fundamental issue is an issue of the society, but they have been over-therapized in some regards, really fundamentally believing that their problem is theirs. And I keep coming back to this idea, and this is a new book out, actually, I highly recommend. He is a Black Freudian analyst in the UK, and his brain, oh, I just love talking to people like this. I got to have him on the podcast, so you get to hear him, but his name is Dr. Dwight Turner. He's not only a great clinician, he's a really great professor. I can tell when I interviewed him on the podcast because he's so accessible. Sorry if you're Freudian, but some Freudians speak in code sometimes, and I feel like I can't join them in the conversation because they're like up here somewhere. I'm like, it feels like, okay, I'm going to be really inappropriate now, so let me be inappropriate. It just feels like they're intellectually masturbating. I'm like, God, Dwight doesn't do that. He is just so, his book is called, I'll put it in the comments, Intersections of Privilege and Otherness in Counseling and Psychotherapy. And he really talks about the process of being socialized as inciting the death instinct in us, and that it completely warps our identity and sense of self. Now I guess I'm getting to the theorist piece, right? You'll get to hear him on the Sidewalk Talk podcast. He's brilliant, and probably would be a great person at some point to have come talk to Theosos, because he's such a dynamic teacher as well. But to me, what he really taught me was that we can think of psychotherapy, and I think this might even be his quote, we can think of psychotherapy as a tool to teach people to adapt to the society with which we live in, or we can think of psychotherapy as a tool to liberate the soul. And I prefer the latter. This first book, Constructing the Self-Constructing America by Philip Cushman, I've tried to get him on the podcast. He's brilliant. he's not a big social media guy, as you can imagine. He's a Freudian, but pretty eclectic Freudian. This book is really taking this idea, how psychotherapy came to America, how it got marketed, how we were able to start selling it to people and getting people to come in and pay for therapy, and what was going on socio-politically at the same time that therapy was sort of coming up. This book is, it's just dog-eared. I just constantly am like peeling through it, right? But particular to American society, in order to promote therapy, you know, Freud's, I think it was it his nephew or his cousin, became a master of public relations, and he used the ideas of the unconscious to learn how to build and market and brand companies. So he learned how to use the tenets of the unconscious to draw us to buy stuff. And what Philip Cushman says is that unlike other societies, that the American self is a self built on the empty self. And if we have an empty self, then we have to fill that empty self. So it helps us become better consumers, better builders, and better workers, right? Because we're now using all those things to fill that empty self. And that psychotherapy becomes a vehicle for attempting to fill the empty self rather than to liberate the self. So I think this is fascinating. Feybound, so I already told you about this book that really pissed me off with James Hillman and Michael Ventura when I was in grad school, because I'm like, what am I spending all my money on? Oh my God, I'm just going to make people worse. A Biography of Loneliness by Feybound Alberti. So this is a fascinating field. She's a historian who studies medical history. And so she studies the history of the human body throughout time and how we've treated the human body. And she made this link that loneliness kind of launched itself at a time when, she said, in the 18th century, two things happened. We started to believe that we had direct access to the divine. We didn't need an interlocutor anymore. We didn't need a tabernacle. We didn't need a priest. And suddenly these divine experiences, you know, we could embody on our own. But second, we started to really mechanize or medicalize the human body. And the Cartesian split and the I think, therefore I am, we also started to treat the body as object rather than body as the lived experience. So therefore, she says, she believes, and this is from her lens, the body is the source, the starting place. And of course, I'm a somatic psychotherapist, so I love this, of reclaiming our sense of community and connection and healing, that we somehow have to find our ways back into our body. So you can listen to that on the podcast. Because I'm getting ready to do this 12-week-long Jung shadow thing, kind of built around Dr. Claire Pinkola Estes' work. I've been doing some of my own reading. I'm reading Robert Johnson's book on the gifts of the shadow, and just loved the whole section on romantic love and how, you know, he writes that with the decline of church in modern Western society, we have replaced that sort of desire for the ecstatic, where we would have access to the divine, with romance. So romance is the religion of our time. It's how we're sort of having the ecstatic experiences that we started to believe we could have once we started having direct access to the divine. And I just thought, oh, because half my practice is working with couples, and I see this all the time. My mother was married 6 times. I've been in therapy for 25 years, I should say, probably because my mother was married for 6 times. It wasn't such an easy childhood. But she was in love with that ecstatic. She was in love with being in love. She wanted that religion. She wanted that access to that kind of divinity that happens, right, when we're able to fall in love and be intoxicated by that experience. And you can see with the dating apps that people are having a hard time. Like, it's like, oh, let's see, is there another like new divine experience that I'm going to have with this next person? And ooh, it doesn't look too electric, so I'm going to move on to the next one. And we're just, yeah, we're sort of being sensitized for that. I did also recently get to have a conversation with Niobe Way from NYU. I don't know if you're familiar with Niobe's work. She's a neuroscientist who has been studying social connection and loneliness, and I am excited because I was just invited to come train with her. Her project called Patch. So she started out as a school teacher working with inner city kids, and then went back and has studied loneliness and neuropsychology and human connection. And she works alongside Carol Gilligan, who you may know. She's a feminist psychotherapist and a cultural anthropologist. And she's really, what Niobe said to me, and she's a badass, she's a big time activist, but she said, look, we're not going to solve racism, sexism, transphobia, or any of this stuff in society until we solve the problem that we are built to dehumanize. Everything in our society is built to dehumanize. So you solve one of these problems, you're just going to find another way to dehumanize somebody else. You've got to get at the root of the problem, which is everything that we have built has been designed to dehumanize one another. And I just, of course, thought that was super groovy. So now I know, I've been chasing her for 3 years. So to finally get her on the podcast was like a huge, I couldn't sleep the night before and I was so excited. And she's probably one of my heroes. And then I'll say more about this. I'll just finish my theoretical thinking with Rollo May. Please enter lots of stuff in the chat, other people you want me to read, because I really want all that stuff. But this quote from Rollo May, he talks about how the hollow among us are bound to become more lonely, no matter how much they lean together, for hollow people do not have a base from which to learn to love. And that always sticks with me when I think about the structures that we're building incentivize a hollow self. So where am I now? This is the closing part of my talk, and we can move into some interaction. I have changed, right? I've been through a full journey. It's been years now that I've been leading Sidewalk Talk. I've certainly had moments of grandiosity. It was titillating to have the video viral and viewed 10 million times. I have been in the depths of shadow material where I'm like, I'm just a narcissistic asshole. Who the heck am I? I have been really looking at where I stand in terms of power and activism, finding my own feet when it comes to how do I hold different aspects of myself. And what's really happened, and the pleaser in me, I definitely have some of the classic yes girl, also that capitalist, bigger is better, scale is better. And I'm learning, no, that's not actually true. Connected is better. And so I was easily sucked into that part of it. So now Sidewalk Talk, for me, I'm really learning, what does conscious capitalism or conscious growth look like? So I've been doing a lot of work around that. What is the real distinct why? For me, it's culture change. 2, it's experimentation. And 3, it's not helping people. It's getting more people to learn how to connect as humans. And trying to get people, the media doesn't ever get that message right when they cover a project, and it really pisses me off. It's about learning how to connect with people as humans and do so in a way that removes or at least helps people indict their bias, understand more about holding context and nuance, to understand where they come from and how where they come from is influencing how they're meeting that person in the exchange. I think regular people can learn that stuff. I really, really do. So Sidewalk Talk is increasingly focused on practicing and teaching listening skills, not fixing or healing people, right? Personally, I am immersing myself more in the poetic and art and mythology. And I'm a little less like staccato and bullet pointed, and I don't know, I'm sort of listening to where things are going and not always so clear, and just kind of following the flow of what's happening and tracking systems and I'm thinking a lot about technology. I have to say I've been really crabby. I get technologists that reach out to me all the time and want to build an app for Sidewalk Talk. And I say, I don't want to build an app for Sidewalk Talk, but you should, you got this brand awareness. I'm like, then you're not understanding what this project is about, because you as the app maker, your unconscious is now already codifying the interaction. Because the minute you decide how that user interface is designed, you have removed the entire poetry of the experience. And I have actually an app maker who's on next week for the podcast, and he's amazing. He's this Frenchman, and he's so poetic, but I just don't want I don't want an app. So we're never going to have an app. And it's going to really piss people off, but I don't want an app. I've also been fascinated by the psychology of nonprofits. Boy, there's some really interesting shadow stuff in nonprofit work. Wow, I had no idea. There's a lot of saviorism, ton of paternalism. Like, remember how I said my interns, they need the client to kind of come in and be sick so that they can feel like a good therapist? Nonprofits need problems to stay so that they can feel really good that they're going off and fixing stuff. There's some of that shadow stuff in nonprofits that I'm like, whoa, that is a trip. And then I told you that I'm doing my own deep shadow work. And where I am the most is I'm doubting my field. I'm doubting my field. I got a call from a big insurance. There are a lot of these insurance providers that are popping up in the Silicon Valley, where they're going to Google and Facebook and Uber and saying, we're going to provide this entire wraparound mental health insurance infrastructure for your staff. And one of these companies, the assistant called and said, hey, our CEO wants to be on the Sidewalk Talk podcast. And I'm thinking, I wonder if she ever looked up that I actually interviewed to be a provider for them, and they rejected me because I'm not a CBT and DBT therapist. I don't want to negate CBT and DBT therapists, but the fact that these folks with so much power and influence and wealth and funding are determining the direction of psychotherapy, stripping out the poetry and the soul. I mean, the poetry and the soul has already been stripped out of therapy, right? But it's getting worse, not better. And it pisses me off to no end if I'm fired up about something. So I didn't call her back, although secretly I should, and have her on and have a provocative conversation. But this idea that psychotherapy is being used to dust people off, get them functioning again, and shove them back to work so they can be good cogs in the machine really worries me. Really, really worries me. And so if I'll say where I am now with the whole process and what Sidewalk Talk has taught me, is that how do psychotherapists create social change on a massive scale? And for me, I'm interested in getting out on the sidewalk, because I feel like every time we're out there and I block somebody's footpath, there is a provocation in that says something's going on here. Even when they scratch their head and think it's weird. And it may not be weird in Brazil. Maybe you guys are just so much more friendly than the Silicon Valley is. I mean, I'm so interested in doing more listening in different locations around the world. But this idea that there is a kind of consciousness raising that happens when we're sitting there, and that we're changing the culture. And I wish that we could get more. I just want to come up with more creative. I'd like there to be more art. I think we need people doing. I once met this guy, and I still want to do something with him. He has this ginormous quilt. It's the size of a city block. And he uses recycled clothing to make the yarn. And he has people sit in the middle of city squares and start, it's not a quilt, I'm sorry, it's a knitting. And he teaches them how to knit or crochet. I'm not good at that stuff, but I went and did it. It was at a Burning Man light kind of event. And it was amazing. People just start sitting around and start knitting together, and you all start talking. But what was really cool is he's this big, muscly guy with a t-shirt on. He didn't look like a guy that's going to be knitting. So it was even perfect, the juxtaposition. And I think that those kinds of projects, we need more of these social projects that create a protest through connection, that reclaims soul in some kind of way, that says, damn it, I'm not going to live in a soulless world anymore. I'm not going to do it. So that's all I came prepared to talk about. That's my story. Little all over the place, but it's a free association. So thank you for having me here and for letting me share and hearing my story. It was more fun to come talk about this because I knew I could say all the crazy stuff that I wouldn't dare say, like on a news channel or something. Because some people will be like, what is she talking about? So thanks for letting me come talk about all the deep stuff. Oh, there's questions. Well, good. We'll get to some of those questions. So who do I hand it back to?
Traci, queria agradecer imensamente a tua fala. Eu passaria horas aqui podendo conversar sobre a minha experiência também nas ruas. Nunca imaginei que a gente ia poder ter esse encontro. Pensando nessa experiência da rua, assim, tua fala me levou, né, muito para a experiência da rua, uma saudade de voltar para a calçada. Eu não sei se você quer ler um pouco os comentários primeiro, antes de entrar para as perguntas, como é que você prefere fazer? Isa, ela prefere ler ou a gente pode seguir com as perguntas já?
I'd like to ask the community what the community wants to co-create.
Vamos abrir para as perguntas, então, Paty?
Lu, eu não te ouço.
Vamos abrir para as perguntas?
Vamos.
Vamos.
Grace, eu tenho uma primeira pergunta, pensando um pouco nessa questão da sombra. Como é que você acha que depois dessa questão, não só da Covid, né, mas de tudo isso que a gente tem vivido no clima, na política, eu queria te ouvir um pouquinho se você acredita, né? Eu sei que é a esperança que a gente tem, mas como é que você acha que o senso de comunidade, né, vai vencer aí na luta entre Eros e Thanatos? Como é que a gente pode pensar nesse senso de comunidade depois dessa crise toda que a gente tem vivido, né? Acho que tanto o Brasil quanto os Estados Unidos, acho que tem algumas semelhanças. Queria te ouvir um pouquinho em relação a essa possibilidade do senso de comunidade ganhar, digamos assim.
And I would welcome everybody weighing in and talking about this together in the chat too. I'll just share with you some broad brushstrokes. I wrote a piece a few years ago called "There's a Donald Trump Living in All of Us," and it really pissed off some of my San Francisco colleagues. Because I'm like, whoa, that's pretty easy to just make this guy the bad guy. But it seems to me like he's a reflection of something that lives in all of us. And we probably need to start there and look at our own narcissism, our own unloved and uncared for and unhated and our hated self. We need to look at what produced him and how it's produced parts of us. And you can see this this quality of, when you look at a system that's designed for competition, right? And that your identity and worth are about winning, and perhaps even your survival is about winning. This goes back to what I'd said about dehumanization and Niobe Wei's work. We don't give ourselves much room to win against dehumanization. Like, how am I saying this? I don't mean to sound hopeless, but I was just on a call last week with all these researchers, the top researchers in the world on loneliness. And they're still using the capitalist conquering lens. And I think if we use that conquering lens, I think it's already that lens that's the problem, right? So even in this conversation right now, you asked me, Traci, where do you want to go next in the conversation? I say, what does the community want to co-create in the conversation? And I really learned this from a racism listening circle that I was facilitating through Sidewalk Talk. This older Black woman joined. She goes, oh, great, another white woman that's setting the agenda again. And I said, man, you're right. Let's co-create this agenda. The challenge is that co-creation takes more time, and we're in an environment that doesn't like to take time. We want things to be really fast and efficient. But I think that the fundamental change that's going to need to happen is co-creation and a shifting away from competition. That's just my free association at the moment. Let me change my mind 10 minutes from now, because I probably will, but that's what's coming up for me. What do you have to say?
Muito obrigada.
Na verdade, não é muito sobre isso, mas eu queria fazer uma pergunta para a Traci. Primeiro, eu queria agradecer imensamente sua presença aqui no Tiaços. Adorei tua palestra, adorei sua fala, adorei a tua espontaneidade. Foi uma delícia. Nem vi o tempo passar enquanto você falava. Eu queria primeiro fazer uma defesa. Como boa psicóloga arquetípica, eu queria fazer uma defesa ao James Hillman. No livro dele de 100 anos de psicoterapia, e o mundo continua cada vez pior, eu diria que o título do livro é um pouco mais pessimista do que o conteúdo dele. No livro, inclusive, ele fala muitas coisas parecidíssimas com o que você trouxe aqui. E uma das coisas que ele fala lá, e que eu associo ao que você nos expôs, que os nossos consultórios precisam ser células revolucionárias, células que preparam a revolução. E eu acho que você está fazendo isso, né, com esse seu trabalho Sidewalk, é muito incrível, né? Bom, essa é a primeira coisa que eu queria que depois você comentasse um pouquinho. Depois eu fiquei um pouco com essa palavra que você usa tanto no título como você usa no meio da sua fala, que é a mecanização dos corpos. Tem um livro que em português é traduzido como Caliban e a Bruxa, eu não sei como é traduzido em inglês, é da Silvia Federici. E ela diz muito isso, né, do corpo humano como instrumento para o capitalismo. Eu queria saber se quando você usa esse termo, você está se referindo um pouco a isso também, e você diz alguma coisa do retorno ao corpo. E juntando tudo, né, juntando o Sidewalk, o projeto os projetos comunitários, será que a gente pode juntar o retorno ao corpo com esse projeto nas ruas que você faz?
I like James Hillman. I just wasn't liking him at that time. Yeah, I think that we can and must get back to the body. You know, we had this young woman that I met, and frankly, she's just more in her body than I am. I felt quite intimidated by her, but she led a Sidewalk Talk event that I attended. I think we had 27 people out in Union Square one day. And she started us all off teaching us Tai Chi movements and mudras on different ways to set boundaries, to channel energy, to ground. And I'm like, whoa, I love this. So again, this is also why I like co-creation, because then I got to be in this experience of learning. And she was very young. She was in her middle 20s. And I have found two groups of people that, you know, the folks that have wealth right now are of a particular age. And I'm finding that I really like listening to I've been in dialogue with a retired Jewish analyst who's 75 since the election. I've been kind of stressed, so I've needed to have my own listening, have someone listen to me. And so she has done some space holding for me. And then I love what young people, as much as millennials are getting picked on or teased, I actually find hope in these young folks. I find them to be, at least the ones that I've gotten to interact with, not entirely driven by money, and really challenging power, and that it's been set up in ways that I find quite delicious. They scare the shit out of me at the same time because I'm old, but I'm totally inspired by them too.
Traci.
Obrigada, Traci.
Traci, pensando nessa questão da cocriação, você gostaria de ler os comentários?
Eu queria fazer uma pergunta antes, e eu acho que é uma...
Okay, first, can you teach me how to say shit in Portuguese?
Merda.
Merda. It's like French.
Merda. Exatamente, acho a mesma origem. Traci, eu queria fazer uma pontuação, uma colocação rápida. Eu acompanho a Patrícia aí desde o início, acho que a gente com uma combinação de pretensões em relação ao projeto Sidewall Brasil distintas, né? Acho que a Patrícia tem muito mais essa preocupação como psicóloga junguiana da escuta. A minha preocupação é muito mais no sentido do ativismo social e político, né? Eu acho que essa ponte é importante. Então, eu lembro quando eu voltei para o Brasil, depois dos meus 7 anos de Espanha, eu tinha acabado de terminar o doutorado em ciência política, eu lembro de um dia, do mês que eu voltei, em que eu cheguei no Brasil com uma esperança de que a gente, assim, querendo contar... Enfim, eu passei muito tempo estudando o interesse público, políticas públicas. A palavra público era muito presente comigo. Quem conversava comigo toda hora falava que a comparação entre morar na Europa e morar nos Estados Unidos, principalmente no Brasil, é a sensação de que o público te calça, o público te dá, a comunidade, você tem um senso de comunidade maior, né? Então, eu entendo que isso é uma das questões, eu entendi e ainda entendo que é uma questão fundamental. Então, eu queria um pouco que você colocasse isso, fizesse algumas reflexões brevemente sobre a importância do público. Até eu coloquei, tenho lido sempre voltando para a minha vida corporativa, que eu estou aqui de volta fazendo. Não sou mais acadêmico, esse período de doutorado terminou e eu estou na vida de novo. Mas essa preocupação de como que a gente resgata o senso de comunidade, como a gente resgata o público, porque isso na minha visão, é o grande problema. Eu acabei de ler um livro que eu não sei se você já leu, do Michael Sanders, em que ele faz uma crítica, uma séria crítica à meritocracia, né? E ele, na prática, ele está defendendo a construção de comunidade, porque a meritocracia meio que ela legitima a segregação e a diferenciação das pessoas. Então, isso acaba sendo profundamente divisivo, profundamente negativo para a comunidade, para a construção de comunidade. E na minha visão, esse é o grande problema da nossa sociedade, o problema que levou às situações aí, a esse populismo, as crises que a gente está vivendo hoje.
I mean, I wish I were a philosopher or something and had something really clever to say here. But what I will say, you know, when I was studying political science, I got pretty, and this happened actually after Donald Trump got elected. I started a second little nonprofit that I really handed off to other people. But me and a group of 7 women started meeting for 2 hours every Monday to figure out how can we be politically active on the small scale, right? And we had a range of identities covered, although all women. And the first thing that we wanted to attack was essentially we had segregation in our schools indirectly. We were busing kids in. We were in a small community of 13,000, but we were busing in Hispanic farm workers' kids from the south end of town to one of the schools with no real integration plan. Whenever I would drop my kids off at school, the white parents wouldn't even greet the Hispanic parents. And so for me, without an organizing body like a church that used to get many different identities to gather as a central gathering point anymore, I wonder if us not, and I think sometimes I can get so grandiose and, oh, I want to get involved in the presidential election. But actually, I'm like, I didn't. Grounds were designed for. So you were really packed in tight next to other families. And at night, if you wanted, you would turn your light on and set out chairs so that, because not just musicians played on stages, but a lot of the people attending were musicians. And so you would bring your guitar or your banjo or your and you would just go from campsite to campsite and you would just sit down in a chair and either play along or listen with. Yeah, I also loved parenting in that community. At the time, my youngest son was 3 and he was very brave and would run off. And so we just
tem histórias, né? Então, isso é uma coisa bem interessante. E eu fico muito empolgada com essa ideia, assim, que já existe, né, em vários lugares, de poder trabalhar com essa escuta. Então, eu queria fazer 2 perguntas para a Traci. A primeira é um pouco do método, assim, que eu acho que ela fala um pouco sobre isso, assim, o que funciona, o que não funciona, né? Porque numa dessas vezes que eu estava acompanhando um trabalho era um trabalho de doação, de comida e de roupas e tal. Um deles falou assim: vocês são doidos de virem para cá sem nenhuma segurança. Essas pessoas aqui que estão aqui na rua, muitas são drogadas, muitas são fugitivas da polícia. Então, como é que vocês vêm aqui de coração aberto sem nenhuma segurança? Por isso que eu pergunto um pouco essa questão, né? Ela mesma falou um pouco sobre isso, né? De como desenvolver questões de segurança, o que funciona, o que não funciona, né? E a outra pergunta foi quando ela falou da questão da psicoterapia como adaptação ou como uma liberação da alma. Eu queria perguntar se essa liberação da alma é possível imaginar um outro mundo, se é possível imaginar um outro mundo possível para além do capitalismo. E não só para pensar, né? Se é possível, a partir dessa liberação da alma, propor uma mudança real, né? Obrigada.
Well, I would love to start with that last one now, the second part of your question. I don't know why, but I feel very teary with that second one, and I feel a little excited because I'd actually like the group to answer that question. And so for just a minute, I would love for all of us to daydream together about the world that we would create. Don't worry about rules. Don't worry about whether it's possible. I don't care about any of that. But how do we even create it if we don't have a space to dream about it? So just for a minute, can we just sit in silence and dream for a second about that, about the second piece that Chris Viana just brought up? If we're going to liberate the soul, can we imagine a new world? What's the world that we can imagine? How would you set it up? You're welcome to type in the chat or just think of it for yourself or take yourself off mute. I'm just curious if anyone feels compelled to respond in voice, that question that Chris Viana mentioned about what you're imagining in this world.
Oi. Eu fiquei pensando quando ela fala da escuta num lugar de igual, de estar realmente junto e de me deixar ser movida pelo outro. E quando o outro percebe que eu fui movida por ele, como isso faz diferença, né? Eu acho que esse lugar da real consideração do outro, o outro perceber que ele me moveu verdadeiramente, eu sinto que para mim hoje é o que faz diferença.
Thank you. What came to mind when I was sitting with your question was I had a conversation. I don't know if you have art of hosting communities in Brazil, but I got to interview Toke Paluden Muller, who's a Danish man who, when we started our interview, he actually went back and talked about, his heritage. And he shared with me that schooling for children in Denmark was always about teaching children about being good citizens, not teaching them to be good workers. And so that was the first association I made. I'm like, oh gosh, we probably have to start first with how we're socializing kids, right? And then the second place was, and we also probably need to there was an indigenous teacher who I was listening to, and he was talking about how our original connection with nature was so profound that we were in communication with the trees and the rivers and the stones. I don't know if that's possible because I've never experienced it, but I wonder about this idea that our connection to our body and to nature would also be part of how we become a soulful human. So we're good citizens and we're connected to our bodies and nature. Those were the two things that came up in me just initially. Before I answer Cristiana's other question, I just wanted to make space for any other imaginings that people had about this new world where we were liberating the soul.
Eu só queria fazer, eu concordo plenamente com a questão eu dou aula como voluntário no cursinho popular. E esse ano eu tive a oportunidade de dar aula de atualidades no Brasil, que é meio que faz um mix entre sociologia e antiga educação moral e cívica no Brasil, né? E que, em grande parte, as aulas que eu dou, elas são 1h30 de tentar ensinar cidadania para esses jovens, né? Porque é o que mais falta no Brasil hoje, né? E eu não só no Brasil, eu falo no Brasil mais de cátedra, mas é a falta das pessoas entenderem como funciona a comunidade, como funciona uma sociedade que se diz democrática, um Estado democrático de direito. Então, grande parte do que a gente está batendo cabeça, como sociedade hoje, né, a gente está indo aí para a pandemia, não sei se você sabe, Traci, aqui no Brasil, a gente está caminhando para 300 mil mortos, com 2.000 mortes de média na última semana. É uma tragédia, e com uma sociedade que não só elegeu uma pessoa completamente desqualificada para a presidência, que luta contra a vacina, que pode um negócio assim, que nem o Trump fez isso. O Trump lutou lá, correu para que a vacina Pfizer saísse antes da eleição, porque ele sabia que se saísse antes da eleição, ele tinha um pushing, uma final ali, tentar reverter o quadro. Aqui não é o contrário, o cara joga contra a vacinação. É um negócio escatológico. E aí a gente olha para isso e vê que as pessoas... É um pouco o retrato de uma sociedade que não de um extremado individualismo e que não consegue entender o que é, como construir sociedade, como a sociedade funciona, né? Então, acho que isso é uma questão chave. Ou a gente constrói isso, faz esses jovens entenderem que eles são cidadãos, antes de tudo, antes de consumidores, ou a gente não vai ter muito futuro, porque ser cidadão te dá uma dimensão de que você tem que respeitar a comunidade, respeitar o teu espaço físico, né, o habitat que você está, e que a vida não é só consumo, né? Então, acho que isso é chave na minha concepção, se me permite.
I don't have an answer. It sounds a little hopeless, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I keep feeling like we're looking for some, when I think about, well, first of all, I'm fascinated by what is the symbol of the vaccine. Like, I would love to know your thoughts on that. Please analyze that one. Like, what is the fear of the vaccine? It's this thing that goes into your body and it's going to potentially infect you or control you. Some people think it's going to be a controlling device. And yet, the figurehead who's telling us not to take the vaccine is, in fact, the controlling device. So it's very interesting to me. It almost, when I play around with this idea, I keep feeling that we have these wishes for a savior. And we keep wanting this strong man to come in and save us so that we don't actually have to participate in social solidarity, so that we don't actually have to mature. I almost feel like it's, and I know this part of me, I'd rather just sit in Donald Trump's lap and drink from his breast. I know this sounds really gross, but that there's something about us that's kind of been infantilized in a way, and we just want to believe what mommy and daddy tell us, and we don't actually want to. There's a whole sector of people that do engage, don't get me wrong, but there's a whole section of people that are longing for this return to the mother's lap, it feels like, and that's, as long as we have that, right, then it's going to be easy to come in and control people and get them to believe what you want to believe. And the characters that we're drawn to are the tough guys. Those are the ones that we feel are going to protect us. And, you know, so I'm just fascinated by this right now, and I'm not sure what to do about it, but I'm fascinated by it. Shall I just, before we move on, shall I answer Christiana's first question, or we can save it for a little bit if there's places we're going? Okay.
Sim, claro. A gente tem a pergunta da Cris, Traci, mais 3 perguntas já na fila, tá bom?
Okay, so I'll be quick. So I have a particular stance about listening to folks who are experiencing homelessness, that we have to respect their sovereignty. And I've had a rule at Sidewalk Talk that you don't go into a homeless encampment unless you're invited in. Because in fact, it's our lens that believes that somehow they are not well, or that somehow they're not okay. But in listening to many, many, many people without houses, so let me say the logistics. I've always partnered with another organization that has already been invited in. So Lava May is a mobile shower unit for homeless in San Francisco. They turned old city buses into showers. They even have some of them with washing machines where the folks without homes can wash their clothes. And so we would sit outside their buses, so that creates a level of safety. And they started putting up a pop-up care village where it was really fun, actually. It was very safe. I took my children with me to volunteer there, and we had listeners there. And the folks could choose to come and be listened to. And we had a partnership with them for about 3 years. And so by the end, some of the folks that were not housed also became listeners alongside of us. So we would show up, and it would be a mix of people that had homes and not homes. And they would set up chairs and sit, and we would all listen together. It was safe because there was a communal space created by an organization, and there had been a relationship built. I don't actively go into unsafe neighborhoods. We have one chapter that does listen in the Tenderloin. She's a minister, but she still holds the listening as equals. And she goes out there every week, and she's been going out every week into the Tenderloin in San Francisco for 5 years. And she is now a fixture in the community. And it's just she and one other woman, and they're both in their 70s. And they sit there and they do not give advice. They don't give food. They sometimes hear pretty dark stuff. And she's trained in acute crisis mental health, so she feels very safe in those spaces too, because that's a population she works with. But she does sit out front of a food network that does have a security guard inside. So there's also some level of safety. But what begins to happen is you become one of the community. Like, she knows half the folks' names that walk by. They know her name, right? The last thing I'll say is I have had listening sessions with folks that don't have homes. And one of them, I felt really changed after listening to them, and like, wow, he's right and I'm wrong. And I don't think I have to get that binary, but he said, why would I want to live in a home? I know you keep wanting to get me in a home. I don't want to live in a home. I wake up every morning under the stars. You don't. I don't actually have this alarm clock that goes off, and the stress that you have to get to your job and get everything done. I don't live that way. I listen to the birds singing, and I get a little bit moist because the fog rolls in. You don't have that. He says, the way that you're living your life is absolutely nuts to me. This is what he says to me. And so I don't approach folks that are living on the streets the same way. I first ask them about them, and do they want to be living there? And I've met several that have zero interest in moving into a house. That everything about society is just fucked to them. Oh, sorry. But I get it. Like there's something really, really important we have to listen to there. Okay. What are the other questions, Patricia?
Traci, só queria compartilhar que nós tivemos uma experiência um pouquinho antes da pandemia com moradores de rua e a minha sensação foi a mesma. Ninguém queria sair da rua, não. A gente tem que chegar com muita cautela, com muito cuidado, porque nem todo mundo quer realmente a casa. Foi uma experiência muito interessante, assim. Elizabeth Naves, você quer fazer uma pergunta? Não?
Não, eu sou Elizabeth Maria.
Acho que sim. Para mim apareceu só Neves. Mas é você.
Não, eu só fiz a interferência. Eu estou gostando bastante, mas eu me senti provocada em vários momentos e coloquei. Obrigada.
Tá ótimo. Patrícia Bahia.
Oi, Traci. Prazer estar aqui escutando. E eu queria, na verdade, compartilhar assim, uma sensação, né? Eu participei de um grupo, já era terapeuta na época, e nós íamos para a rua para conversar com as pessoas, mas não como terapeutas, como pessoas mesmo. E era muito interessante, né? Que a primeira sensação que a gente tinha era que ninguém ia querer falar com a gente, que achar, nossa, nós somos loucas, né? De estar aqui tentando falar com pessoas que nunca viram a gente. E era o contrário, as pessoas sempre eram muito solícitas, muito bacanas. Eu tive um supervisor que ele tinha um hábito muito legal. O consultório dele era do lado de um parque muito bonito lá no Rio de Janeiro. E ele levava, muitas vezes, um paciente ou outro para passear nesse parque durante a sessão e conversar andando, né? Que é uma coisa que o Aristóteles fazia lá, né? As aulas peripatéticas, né? Eu acho que, assim, por que eu estou contando isso? Eu acho que a criatividade, né, no momento da gente estar com nossos pacientes, mesmo hoje, a gente só está aqui nesses quadradinhos, né? Então, a gente tem que reinventar, a gente não vai no parque nem na rua, a gente tem que reinventar essa criatividade, né? Como o Luigi falou ontem, ter amor a esse paciente, né? Como você falou, ele não está quebrado, né? E ter esse amor, né? Essa liberdade de criar um novo espaço nesse quadrado, né? Queria saber o que você acha disso.
Just to ask, do you mean the video square or the square of the room, or both?
Não, aqui do Zoom mesmo, né? Que a gente está atendendo no Zoom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I imagine that we all already are, just because of the way we use our imaginations, right? I'm trying to think a little bit about what the differences have been. I'll tell you, one of the most surprising or interesting things that's come up for me since doing video therapy is exactly what's happening with Luis right now. So if you can all look at Luis, he just leaned in and put his face into his cat's face, right? And I have gotten to see parts of my clients interacting with their pets that I normally wouldn't get to experience, that shows me a part of them that I normally wouldn't experience. Sometimes I show them things. Sometimes I had a girlfriend, I was telling a friend of mine, I like animals. That's the other thing I key in. I have a new friend in the Netherlands. I like people from the Netherlands, it turns out. I didn't know a lot of people from the Netherlands until I moved to Germany. And I said, oh, I really miss having a cat. So she mailed me a cat through the mail. And so sometimes I show clients little things on my desk if it comes up in the session. You know, I have this little, I have this little container my son made me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bert Hellinger's family constellation work. My mother-in-law is a certified Bert Hellinger family constellation therapist. So I have all these objects on my desk, partly because I make constellations with them. And you can make constellations on the video. And I've been in some group sessions, not my individual therapy sessions. It's very similar to sand tray, where you can do sand tray work using the video. I bet some of the folks here in this room have been doing that already. Some of the sand tray folks probably been doing that. I can't do it because my computer is terrible, but another colleague of mine, she actually puts up different backgrounds depending in the moment, like she'll change it. She has one that's a video of a flame. And so depending on what's going on with her and the client, she'll shift the background, which I find fascinating, right? Or that the client chooses, like she has a menu of backgrounds and she'll change the backgrounds based on what's happening in the client. I'm like, wow, that's like super cool. I put on music. So maybe it's not so easy to use music in your office, but it is on your video. You can certainly show videos. So there's some potential. I don't think I have been brave enough to use some of the tools that some of my other friends use. But I think the possibility is there. I think the possibility is there. It sounds like you feel drawn to, though, Patricia.
Assim, eu gosto muito de arte, eu gosto muito de movimento. Eu acho que a presença corporal também, né, que no vídeo às vezes fica meio congelado, eu sinto os pacientes um pouco congelados às vezes. Eu acho que introduzir elementos, assim como você falou, é bem interessante, sim, com certeza.
Bom, alguém tem mais alguma pergunta? A gente está chegando no final. Eu tenho uma pergunta, Traci. Primeiro, uma colocação, que eu fiquei muito feliz de você saber, de eu saber que não vai ter um aplicativo do Sidewalk Talk, apesar de estar muito adaptada ao atendimento online. Essa era uma preocupação que eu tinha, né? Depois a gente pode até conversar melhor sobre essa experiência que a gente vem tendo aqui no Brasil, né, em relação ao Sidewalk Talk na pandemia. A gente tem só um círculo de leitura uma vez por mês sobre o racismo, mas não conversas online. Mas saber que não teremos um aplicativo muito me aquece o coração. E uma curiosidade que eu tenho, né, de pensar que você começou em São Francisco e hoje você está numa cidade pequena da Alemanha, e talvez de outras conversas que você tenha com outros voluntários, queria saber um pouquinho qual é a diferença de atender em São Francisco, a diferença de atender em Heidelberg, como deve ser diferente a que eu tenho aqui em São Paulo, né? Eu fico pensando, né, o que o Hillman fala, né, das paisagens da alma e das cidades. Então, ontem, né, pensando no nosso encontro, fiquei pensando como né, essa diferença das ruas de São Francisco para a Alemanha. Queria te ouvir um pouquinho nessas paisagens da alma, né? Como é que a alma transita e imagino que seja diferente.
So I'll first say that I've only listened 3 times in Germany. I've been doing some online listening with an international women's group where it's not all Germans. It's women from all over the world who all speak English. So some women are German. I'm a bit in some, so when I first arrived in Germany, I really kind of I was idealizing Germany and de-idealizing the United States. And now I'm missing home a lot because I am such an open, emotional sharer. I'm very Californian that way. I also freely share my anxieties and neuroses. And I think I perhaps did that without enough cultural context. So I haven't had an easy time community building here. I just find it very rigid. And I have felt some anti-Americanism as well. And I am like the poster child of, I'm loud, I speak a lot, I move freely in my body, I wear a big flower on my shirt, I wear red lipstick. I mean, I haven't been interested in altering those aspects of myself to fit in here. So I think a few of the Sidewalk Talk German folks haven't been super excited to have Traci Ruble in Germany, to be quite honest. But have I stopped? I haven't stopped. I've just found places where I'm welcome. And it's part of what instigated me joining a women's group. And one of the women in my women's group is a New Zealander who lives in Switzerland. And she's a United Nations human rights attorney. And she's turned me on to Erin Meyer's work called Culture Maps, where she's just studied, done surveys cross-culturally. It helps you understand the nuance of different cultures. And that's really helped me cultivate empathy for the differences between what is, Californians, even amongst the United States, are much more open, right? So if you go to other states in the United States, like the Midwest, people don't share as much. If you go to the South, people are very friendly and polite, but they don't share vulnerabilities. Californians, a lot of them go to therapy. There's a lot of openness. There's a lot of racial diversity. So California is like its own country inside the United States, it feels like sometimes. But I have made friends with this fellow in Berlin, and he started it. I helped him in the beginning. I'll probably be taking my name off the website because I haven't helped him since. But in the international consortium called the Togetherness Hub, I'll put it in the chat. He just brought together leading thinkers and researchers all over the world to think about loneliness. And he's a German guy, but he's a very unusual German guy. He's super open, super like big and friendly. And he even told me, I interviewed him recently for the podcast. He says, I'm a little bit crazy for a German because he's so open. So I'm finding my way. I'm going to make a trip up to Berlin to see him, and we're going to do a listening event up there. I also met a lovely person in the Netherlands. I'm going to go up and do a listening event with her. And then I met a lovely fellow in Paris. And then one of the original San Francisco listeners is in Paris. So we're going to go do a listening event there. Yeah, so it's new, it's different. I think the hardest is I don't speak German. And then I kind of feel like I'm like, oh, I shrink a little bit because I don't know how to communicate. But that's a good experience for me to feel too.
Traci, eu fiquei imaginando o que eles pensariam de brasileiro.
Just come, I'll have your back.
Lua?
Paty, posso fazer uma pergunta para vocês duas?
Claro.
Eu queria que vocês contassem um pouco, fiquei curiosa para saber da experiência do Sidewalk na pandemia. O luto que foi, né? Imagino, o início da pandemia. E depois como é que vocês se reinventaram aí? Aqui no Brasil, inclusive, Paty, quero saber de você também.
Patricia, why don't you go first?
Acho que alguém está com o microfone aberto. Parece que tem um vento.
Para nós está normal.
Ah, então acho que é aqui. Bom, Lu, acho que é uma ótima pergunta. Na verdade, eu acho que eu ainda estou elaborando esse luto. Ouvindo a Traci hoje, eu percebi o quanto eu sinto falta da rua e dessa experiência. A gente teve, no começo da pandemia, nós fizemos um projeto, uma tentativa de ouvir idosos. Foi assim que a pandemia começou, a gente não teve um sucesso muito grande, acho que a gente estava ainda se adaptando. A gente teve algumas pessoas, mas do pouco que a gente teve, foi muito rico. E aí, no meio da pandemia, veio a questão do George Floyd, e aí a gente começou a discutir as questões do racismo. E hoje a gente tem esse círculo de leitura que é mensal, e tem sido uma experiência incrível, assim, uma pequena comunidade, eu digo, que foi formada com essa questão do racismo, e a gente tem seguido, agora no próximo semestre, a gente vai ter a leitura de mais 6 livros em torno dessa questão, e a gente também está numa expectativa de um projeto de cartas, talvez, que a gente está pensando começar agora em abril, maio, essa questão das cartas, né, como uma tentativa, como a pandemia, né, a gente cada vez mais não tem certeza, né, dessa volta para as ruas, então a gente tem tentado criar esses coespaços, né, de interação, como é que a gente pode seguir. Mas eu diria que eu estou de luto ainda.
I just feel grateful for the invitation to think about my morning, because as I listen to Patricia and feel in my own heart, it's almost brings tears to my eyes, because my own sense of soul, when I would listen on the sidewalk, would really come forward, and so it's a piece of my life that's missing. I've thought about some of these other campaigns like letters, and I'm really trying to do less. I've discovered that I hate doing operations and coordination. And I was offering too much of myself doing those kinds of things. So I've been doing little small things. I have an elderly man that lives across the street. I don't know his name, but he comes out, and it's the biggest joy of my day that he walks 3 times a day with his walker out front of my window. And this is my psychotherapy office, so I'm still holding about 45 psychotherapy clients. So I'm still really busy doing psychotherapy work in San Francisco. But he's meaningful to me because he's my community. So I've started drawing him pictures and leaving them on his walker, unbeknownst to him. Sometimes I bought a bunch of little things. I'll show you. Hold on. I guess I've turned this into quite a project, but I leave little silly things on his walker. This is an ice cream cone. Or I'll leave a sticker. And I have no idea if he enjoys it. And I don't leave them every day because I don't want to overwhelm him. So it's every 3 days. And I just get a chuckle. I think I've seen his wife find them, and I think she might enjoy them more than he does sometimes.
Mini donuts.
And then I mail these to my niece. I have a niece in Dresden as well. So there's 2 beneficiaries. My big dream right now that I really want to do, but my husband told me that it's way too American and he won't participate with me, is just in my neighborhood. I want to have because my husband's German, I want to see if I can get the 10 houses on this side of the street and the 10 houses on the other side of the street to all put a table and chairs in their driveway and to have a street-wide tea party where we won't necessarily interact because of social distancing, but we'll just all be out on the street having tea or lunch and see each other. And I really wanted to hire a musician to come walk up and down the street and play music for us. And my husband thinks this is just crazy. But then another friend of mine says, you must do this. So this is what I really want to do right now, because I don't think I'm going to get a vaccine until September. So I think I might do this thing and have to do it by myself. And that all these neighbors are going to think it's super weird.
Do it, do it.
So I really appreciate how warm and welcoming you've been. I heard her.
I would say your husband is to Germany.
He's also an introvert.
Eu espero que você faça e vou esperar o vídeo do chá.
Okay, maybe you'll give me courage.
Para encerrar esse nosso encontro, eu queria te dar de presente uma imagem que eu lembrei da última saída que a gente teve para a rua, que foi no dia 7 de março. Nós entramos em isolamento no dia 16. Veio um menino de mais ou menos 9 anos, a gente tinha feito uma saída num parque, era uma praça, era uma feira, e a gente estava ouvindo numa praça. E a mãe dessa criança chegou perto de mim e falou, olha, o meu filho gosta muito de conversar, eu não tenho muita paciência, você não quer conversar um pouquinho com ele? Falei, claro. E aí ele se sentou. E nós ficamos 2 horas e 10 conversando. E a mãe não voltou mais. E ele falou para mim que ele gostava muito de falar. E eu perguntei para ele sobre o que ele gostaria de conversar comigo. E como nós estávamos num parque, perto da Paulista, uma região central aqui de São Paulo, tinham várias árvores atrás de mim. Ele estava de frente para as árvores e eu de costas. E aí ele virou e falou para mim, eu quero conversar sobre as árvores. Ele falou para mim, você já pensou na grandeza do mundo, na grandeza das árvores? E é sobre as árvores que eu quero conversar com você. Tudo bem? Nós podemos conversar sobre as árvores? Você conversa comigo? E eu falei, claro, vamos falar sobre a grandeza das árvores. E da grandeza das árvores, ele me contou a história de vida dele, e aí foi um belo encontro de 2 horas. Então, eu queria te agradecer imensamente. Uau. Imensamente.
Luis, there's the boy that's going to change the world.
We need more than more boys like this in the world.
Keep listening.
Então, esse é o presente que eu te dou. Agradeço imensamente. Imensamente.
Patricia, this goes all the way into my heart. I love this image, and I can tell by the smiles on people's faces that I don't think I'm the only one receiving this gift in this moment. I think we're all going to be thinking about this boy today, and we're probably all going to be looking at trees today a lot. So thank you for giving all of us this gift. It means a lot. And to this boy, wherever he is, let's just say thank you to him for bestowing his gift on us. Yeah. This is what's awesome about listening, is you get to feel this kind of magic coming from people, and you ignite it over and over and over again, and we keep igniting it in each other. I mean, feel how ignited we all feel right now. The grandiosity of the world and the trees. Wow. So cool.
Então é isso, gente. Queria agradecer muito. Lu, obrigada por essa oportunidade. Marcos, e deixo um beijo enorme. Muito, muito obrigado pela presença de todos vocês.
Muito obrigada, Traci, Pati. Foi um encontro inesquecível. Sexta-feira que vem temos IPEC Burnett. Espero vocês lá.
Obrigada.
Um beijo.
Um beijo. Beijo, Traci.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. How do I say thank you in Portuguese?
Obrigada.
Yeah. Obrigada, obrigada, obrigada.
Thank you.
Um beijo.